The Leslie Marshall Show, the only true democracy in talk radio, of, for, and by you, the people. Live nationwide and streaming live at lesliemarshallshow.com. Call in with your thoughts at 888-6-LESLIE.
Here to set you free. Happy Tuesday. I'm Leslie Marshall. Great show in store. Great guest coming up a little bit later. Mimi Roca will be in the house. But as we like to start it off each and every program, and most of the programs, we don't do it every single one. Let's check what's ripped. The impeachment trial for former President Donald Trump kicked off in the Senate today. That began with debate over the constitutionality of the House prosecuting a president who has already left office. Now, the lead impeachment manager, Congressman Jamie Raskin, a Democrat from Maryland, he cited examples from history of constitutional framers discussing the standard of impeachment and how it was inconceivable that it could cease to apply during a president's last days in office. He said, quote, President Trump may not know a lot about the framers, but they knew a lot about him. He also declared, pointing to their focus on presidential corruption aimed at elections, quote, and additionally, quote, as a matter of history and original understanding, there is no merit to President Trump's claim that he can incite an insurrection and then insist weeks later that the Senate lacks power to even hear evidence at a trial to even hold a trial. The true rule was stated by former President John Quincy Adams when he categorically declared, quote, I hold myself, so long as I have the breath of life in my body, amenable to impeachment by the House for everything I did during the time I held any public office. Donald Trump, by the way, was impeached when he was still president. This is just the trial, which the Republican Senate Majority Leader at the time, Mitch McConnell, said to wait until after the couple of weeks, and so that Joe Biden would have time to start things and he could be inaugurated. And he even at the time, if you remember, implied that he was happy or said he was happy about the impeachment going forward in the House and didn't know how he was going to decide in the Senate. And I think we all know he was lying. He knew and he pushed it, right? We could have had the Senate trial before Donald J. Trump left office and left the presidency before January 20th. Republican Mitch McConnell was up to his political dirty tricks, knowing that senators, Republican senators, could and would cry a lack of constitutionality because Donald Trump would be a private citizen and no longer a sitting president. So we know what this is about. The politics and the circus aren't on the Democratic side here. It's on the Republican side. Let's rip another. And here is some audio of the House impeachment manager, Jamie Raskin, in his opening impeachment trial statement earlier today.
President Trump has sent his lawyers here today to try to stop the Senate from hearing the facts of this case. They want to call the trial over before any evidence is even introduced. Their argument is that if you commit an impeachable offense in your last few weeks in office, you do it with constitutional impunity. You get away with it. In other words, conduct that would be a high crime and misdemeanor in your first year as president, and your second year as president, and your third year as president, and for the vast majority of your fourth year as president, you can suddenly do in your last few weeks in office without facing any constitutional accountability at all. This would create a brand new January exception to the Constitution of the United States of America.
By the way, I wrote a piece about why there were 5 reasons I felt that the impeachment trial not only should go forward, but must go forward. Interestingly enough, the framers of the Constitution actually wrote about impeachment and removing a president before they wrote about the actual constitutional terms of being president and the executive branch. That's how important this issue was to them, that they discussed this first, wrote about this first, what we are living and experiencing today. It was almost like they wrote it specifically for today. Let's rip another. Here's a very brief audio of Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, referring to Trump's failed coup attempt as deserving of a mulligan.
Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone's entitled to a mulligan once in a while.
What? Really? Really? That's funny. By the way, for some of you, a mulligan, for some of you people are like, a mullah what? A mullah who? For some of you, a mulligan is a stew made from odds and ends of food. But what I think he was referring to, because the former president loved to golf every weekend and, give Joe Biden a hard time for going home to see his family. Oh, he took Air Force One. He's the president. He's supposed to. Anyway, a mulligan is an informal golf term, an extra stroke allowed after a poor shot that's not counted on the scorecard. Donald Trump didn't take an extra stroke. This wasn't just a poor shot, citing insurrection and encouraging insurrection, overthrow of a government, and a free and fair and legal election is not something that shouldn't be counted on the scoreboard, because it will be counted on the scoreboard of my mind, your minds, especially after watching that video again today at the impeachment trial earlier. I mean, for those of us, myself included, who watched the original January 6th insurrectionist storming the Capitol, but to watch that video today, it was even worse than I remembered. Let's rip another. Oh, by the way, and it will not be erased from the scorecard of history either. Well, it is common that many politicians grow more popular once they leave office. That's not been the case for former President Donald Trump. On the eve of his impeachment trial in the front of the Senate, new polling reveals that the Americans want him convicted more than at any other point during his impeachment trial a year ago, and more than earlier polls have shown. More amazingly, more want Trump barred from holding national office ever again than had even an unfavorable rating of any president after one term in office. There's a new ABC Ipsos poll that was released over the weekend showing that 56% of Americans are in favor of the Senate convicting Trump and barring him from holding federal office in the future. Just 43% are opposed to such action, mostly Republicans. This is merely the latest poll to find a clear plurality for such a measure. Even after Trump left office, there was a Monmouth University poll taken at the end of January that indicated 57% wanted him barred from holding federal office and 52% wanted him convicted by the Senate. Every single poll over the last month that you look at, and that meets the standards by CNN, for example, for reporting, has shown that at least 56% of Americans want him to be barred from holding or seeking, depending on the question. Sometimes they say holding, sometimes they say seeking, and not just the presidency, but federal office again. Because remember, he could certainly, be a vice president of somebody's ticket, or be a senator, or, be a congressman, a House member. But it doesn't, when it says federal office, that doesn't rule out being governor of a state. That is, to put mildly, a stunning percentage, by the way. No point last year in the polling between Trump and now President Joe Biden did you see any number close to 56% in a national average. So that means there are likely millions of Americans, if you break it down, who voted for Donald Trump last year, but now want him barred from ever holding federal office again. Indeed, about 80% of Republicans, depending on the polling, don't want Trump being kept from running for or holding office, federal office. But there is still an indication there is a clear drop in support across the board, and especially among Republicans from last year for Donald Trump. Remember, he won more than 90% of self-identified Republicans in last fall's election, and 80% of Republicans don't want him running. Overall, this type of opposition to a sitting or former president after one term is historic. No other president after one term in polling history ever has had an unfavorable rating or disapproval rating north of 50%. And on the much harsher being barred from office question, well, Trump's above that milestone just with that question. It comes to convictions. When you look at convictions specifically, there seems to be a slightly smaller majority in favor of such an action. There's an average of 51% of Americans in live interview polls taken since January 20th that are in favor. A minority of 43% oppose this. And the 8-point difference, well, that's basically stayed the same since last month. The Senate did acquit Trump after his first impeachment trial in 2020. My bet they probably will again today or after this week or days of impeachment trial hearing in the Senate. The gap between supporting and opposing impeachment was 4 points. It never got as high as the 8 points as it is right now. Historically, no other president except for Richard Nixon has ever had a majority of Americans say he should be impeached by the House, convicted by the Senate. Only weeks before Nixon resigned, a clear majority did believe he should be impeached and removed from office. Trump is not likely to be convicted or barred from running for federal office because of supports from Republicans. I'm Leslie Marshall. That's what's ripped from the headlines, part 1. We'll be back with Ripped part 2 right after this quick break. Don't go away.
If you miss Leslie on TV this week, catch up at lesliemarshallshow.com.
If you're worried your friend may be struggling, remember, you don't have to be there to be there.
You could say, how are you, or get a fake tattoo. You could ask with an app if it works for you. You could write him a text or knit him a sweater. If you can't be together, you could write him a letter. Whatever gets you talking. Whatever gets you talking. You could chat on the game, kick off your flip-flops. You could ask on your couch while you binge watch. However you do it, you gotta ask a friend. And if they don't share, you can ask again. Whatever gets you talking. Whatever gets you talking.
Reach out to a friend about their mental health. Learn how you can help at seizetheawkward.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and the JED Foundation.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean. And there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day Sheriff Theodore Middleton and his deputies in Harlan County shot into the house of UMWA organizer Marshall Music, killing his 15-year-old son Bennett. Music organized for the UMWA's District 19. He traveled all over Harlan County. As a district organizer, he was beaten, arrested, and evicted from company housing repeatedly. Some of the mines were organized in Harlan County, but barely. Many coal operators controlled area sheriff's departments and restricted the daily life of miners and their union representatives. Organizing drives started in January of 1937. Union men faced extreme physical violence. Organizers were tear-gassed in early January. Their cars were dynamited later that month. Music and his wife were shot at and warned repeatedly to leave town. Another organizer had his door busted down by deputies and his house ransacked. Music finally agreed to leave town to keep his family safe. But on this day, upon arriving in Pineville, he learned his son had been killed in a firestorm of bullets shot into his house. On March 22nd, the La Follette Committee on Civil Liberties opened hearings into Bloody Harlan. It lasted for 6 weeks. The Justice Department indicted 69 Harlan County coal operators and law officers for criminal conspiracy in violation of the Wagner Act. Meanwhile, the new National Labor Relations Board answered the UMWA charges and found in the union's favor. The board issued a cease and desist order against interference with union activity and ordered the reinstatement of 60 coal miners. As a result, union membership soared to 9,000. The UMWA would continue for decades to fight to keep Harlan County organized.
Follow Leslie on Twitter. Just go to www.twitter.com/Leslie Marshall, and we'll be sure to share your tweets.
We are back on Leslie Marshall, part 2 of what ripped from the headlines Tuesday. An analysis by the nonpartisan CBO Congressional Budget Office released yesterday found that the $15 federal minimum wage bill proposed by Democrats would cut jobs for 1.4 million workers by 2025, but it would lift 900,000 people out of poverty. Now, some people might say, well, how does that work? President Biden, why this matters, included a proposal to increase the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour in his $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief plan. But it's facing resistance from not just Republicans, but moderate Democrats like Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia. He said over the weekend, the president, that he does not expect the provision to survive negotiations, but that he's going to push for it in a separate bill. He said, quote, no one should work 40 hours a week and live below the poverty wage. And if you're making less than $15 an hour, you're living below the poverty wage. Now, this CBO report found that a $15 minimum wage phase-in by June 2025, as proposed by Democrats, would have the following effects. It would increase the cumulative budget deficit over the 2021 to 2031 period by $54 billion. It would drive prices higher for goods and services, stemming from the higher wage of workers paid at or near the minimum wage. Increase wages for 17 million workers who currently make under $15 an hour, as well as 10 million workers whose wages would otherwise be slightly above that wage rate. The cumulative pay of affected people would increase on net by $333 billion, and that net increase would come from higher pay, $509 billion for people who were employed at higher hourly wages under the bill, offset by lower pay, $175 billion, because of reduced employment under the bill. That's what the report adds. So what are they saying? The Senate Budget Committee chair is Bernie Sanders, and this is his response that he wrote yesterday. Quote, I find it hard to understand how the CBO concluded that raising the minimum wage would increase the deficit by $54 billion. 2 years ago, the CBO concluded that $15 minimum wage would increase the deficit by less than $1 million over 10 years. So they're $53 billion higher. And the good news, quote, however, is that from a bird rule perspective, the CBO has demonstrated that increasing the minimum wage would have a direct and substantial impact on the federal budget, he added. He says what that means is that we can clearly raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour under the rules of reconciliation. And it would seem this is how we're going to have to govern without any bipartisan, attitude by the Republicans across the aisle. Let's rip another. And Joe Manchin straddles between Democrat and Republican. The Office of Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger confirmed to CNN yesterday that it has started an investigation into former President Donald Trump's attempts to overturn the state's election results. That includes a phone call from the former president made to Raffensperger himself. Now, during the call, Trump pushed Raffensperger to find votes to overturn the election results after his loss to then President-elect Joe Biden. Now, that's according not just to Raffensperger's a recollection, but to actual audio, an audio recording first released by the Washington Post, later obtained by CNN. This is what Donald Trump said in that audio recording. Quote, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have because we won the state. Just want to point out, even if Donald Trump had found 11,780 votes and won Georgia, he still would not be president. Georgia was only 16 electoral votes, and he was far less behind Joe Biden in electoral vote count, which is why some of this became insane and deranged, if you will, because if you're really gonna overturn Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, which you would need to do all three, and then I think Wisconsin as well, in order for him to have reached the magic number, right? He would need a few states, not just Georgia. But for some reason, that became his mountain to die on. And die on he might, at least in court. Raffensperger was adamant in defending the results of the presidential election, as well as the integrity of the state's voting system during that call, which was an hour long and quite stunning. Trump lambasted his fellow Republicans for refusing to say that he won the election in Georgia, which is false, and repeatedly touted baseless claims of election fraud. Now, there have been no credible allegations of any issues with voting that would have impacted the election. That's been affirmed by dozens of judges, governors, election officials, the Electoral College, the Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security, and even the United States Supreme Court. Walter Jones, a spokesperson for Raffensperger, told CNN in a written statement that, quote, the Secretary of State's office investigates complaints it receives. The investigations are fact-finding and administrative in nature. Any further legal efforts will be left to the Attorney General. The first to report on this investigation was Reuters. They broke that. The announcement of the investigation comes as arguments are set to come underway today in Trump's historic second impeachment trial, where he's facing a single charge of inciting an insurrection after a mob of supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, which many call insurrectionist, other call rioters, other call terrorist, domestic terrorist. 5 people died, including U.S. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. It's actually 6. 2 officers took their lives. It was an attempt by thousands of Trump supporters to interfere with Congress, counting the electoral votes, confirming the win of the presidency to Joe Biden. A zenith of months of Trump promoting conspiracy theories and lies that was the election was stolen from him, which was truly false. The House impeachment managers are planning to use the call with Raffensperger and the months-long campaign to overturn Biden's win as part of their case starting today. A Georgia prosecutor's office is taking the extraordinary January 2nd phone call between Trump and Raffensperger seriously as far as a potential case. So it weighs whether to pursue criminal charges of election fraud against the former president. That's possible. The newly elected Fulton County DA, Fani Willis, is expected to make some type of announcement on the matter one way or another within this month. It was previously reported by CNN that Willis said in a statement she will enforce the law without fear, and that her office was evaluating whether to pursue potential criminal action against Trump. By the way, everybody should enforce the law without fear. That was another excuse about the impeachment trial, right? That it'll upset people or further divide the nation. That's sort of like, well, Leslie killed somebody and, she had the gun in her hand and blood was dripping down her hand. But, it might upset some people. And let's just not have a trial because even though we know she's guilty, the jury's going to acquit her. Really, that's what they're pretty much saying with this. By the way, Willis also said once the investigation is complete, this matter, like all matters, will be handled by our office based on the facts and the law. David Worley, the only Democrat on Georgia's 5-member state election board, said in a statement, quote, I requested that the Secretary of State open an investigation. Now that has been done, I will wait to get the report before requesting further action. Let's rip another. It will take an all-out national effort to dismantle the radicalization pipeline that has planted conspiracy theories in the heads of millions of Americans and inspired last month's attack on the Capitol, according to experts who spoke with Axios. There are 2 key measures that can make a difference, though. Keeping extremists out of the institutions where they could do the greatest damage. Military, police departments, legislatures. Hello. Marjorie Taylor Greene, we're talking to you. Providing help for those who have embraced dangerous ideologies. And online platforms, meanwhile, must be unwavering in their commitment to root out conspiracy theories and lies that undermine faith in democracy. That's according to the experts interviewed by Axios. Radicalization and counterterrorism experts broadly applaud tech companies' efforts now underway to remove this material and the accounts that spread it on their platforms, despite heavy blowback from conservatives. Remember, Twitter made the decision to ban Donald Trump, seen as its own major asset in the fight to slow or reverse radicalization. Extremist experts are worried that this extremism will make us see another January 6th in the future. God willing, that won't be the case. I'm Leslie Marshall. Quick break. Our great guest right after this talk.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Can I touch this? Where does sand come from? Is this tree good for climbing? What happens if I mix these 2 things together? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings. For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Wake up and text. Text and eat. Text and catch the bus. Text and miss your stop. Wait. Text and be late to work.
Sorry, I'm late.
Text and work. Text and pretend to work. Text and act surprised when someone calls you out for not working.
Who, me?
Text and meet up with a friend you haven't seen in forever.
Hi.
Oh, hey.
Text and complain that they're on their phone the whole time. Text and listen to them complain that you're on your phone the whole time. Text and whatever. But when you get behind the wheel, give your phone to a passenger. Put it in the glove box. Just don't text and drive. Visit StopTextsStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
What is it about billionaires and multimillionaires that make them both self-entitled and clueless about the impacts of their greed? Even when they occasionally make a stab at doing something right, they tend to get it all wrong. For example, while major corporations rushed out PR campaigns at the start of today's devastating pandemic, loudly proclaiming all-in-this-together solidarity with their workers, most have quietly and quickly resumed their pre-pandemic policy of widely separating their rich fortunes from the well-being of their workforce. Take supermarket giant Kroger. Last March, as the pandemic spread across America, Kroger honchos publicly hailed grocery workers for staying on the job, despite the health hazard. They ran national TV ads announcing a $2 pay hike for employees, calling it a hero's bonus. But only 6 weeks later, the honchos killed the bonus pay, even as the virus spread. Well, you might think the economy was collapsing, so maybe the bosses had to scrimp. Hardly. Grocery sales and profits have boomed in the pandemic, and, as the investigative newsletter Popular Information now reports, Kroger's profits have zoomed up by $1.2 billion since the disease surged last year. Where did that bonanza go? To fat cat executives and shareholders. Last September, Kroger spent $1 billion on a stock buyback program, a corporate manipulation scheme that artificially jacks up stock prices, thus enriching the already rich handful of investors and executives who own most of the stock. One example, Kroger CEO Rodney McMullen's latest annual paycheck was $21,129,648. This is Jim Hightower saying, and yet those on top of America's financial heap wonder why working families spell boss backwards. Double S-O-B.
If you miss Leslie on TV this week, catch up at lesliemarshallshow.com.
We are back. I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome back on Thursday. Not enough coffee today. Glad to have you with us. And thank you for listening to us on radio, on stream, and watching us on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Twitter's Periscope Live. Good to have you, all of us there watching us or listening to us. You know, today we have a great guest joining us. Mimi Rocha is District Attorney of Westchester County, just north of the Big Apple, New York City. And since taking office on January 1st of this year, she is focused on rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community and shaping a safer and fairer criminal justice system for all of the county's 950,000 residents. A federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York for 17 years, including 5 years as chief of the Westchester Division for the U.S. Department of Justice. Mimi is also a legal commentator for national media. Her DA Twitter handle is @WestchesterDA. Personal Twitter @Mimi Rocha1. District Attorney Rocha, thank you for joining us. And it's a pleasure to have you with us. I became a big fan of yours through Twitter and your tweets, actually, before actually you were elected to your current position. And congratulations on that. Hello?
Oh, there. Can you hear me now?
I can hear. Yeah, I can hear you now. Can you hear me? I was
Sorry,
saying
I
I was a,
to be
I was
honest.
saying I was a fan of yours on Twitter. I would
Yes,
often
so
read.
I heard you. Thank you so much. Sorry, I just had you on mute because we
Oh,
were figuring things out behind the scenes here. So, but it's
oh
great to
no,
be with you. Thanks so much.
no worries, and thank you for joining us. I know you're very very busy. I can see you're actually working at work, unlike me, who was at my home studio. Uh, um, I was just talking during a segment we call "Ripped from the Headlines," where we go over some news. Today is the second impeachment trial in the Senate of Donald Trump, and this all goes around what people perceive to be his responsibility in inciting the violence, the insurrection, et cetera, that occurred on January 6th. But what has come out, and it was before then, and better than I, that before January 6th, extremism was a problem in our country. The FBI would constantly put out reports that weren't making the front page and were buried, on page 4 or 5, that, extreme radical right wing extremists often, white males, individuals who are, either racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, much bigger problem than radical Islamist. And obviously, any kind of extremism seems to be rooted in hate. And one of the things that you have and you're tasked with, in a sense, in your position, is to fight hate, nip it in the bud before it escalates to that place of words turn into actions that are violent, words turn into criminal action and extremist action, like we saw on January 6th. Can you speak to some of that, because that's a really difficult task, especially where our nation is right now after the past 4 years?
Sure. So it is a challenge for sure, but one that I embrace and have already seen a lot of improvement, in the sense that I think we're really even more focused on it than we were before at this level. And when I say we, I mean the DA's office, but also local law enforcement. So, obviously, when people think about combating violent extremism, dealing with domestic terrorism, even though we don't have a federal domestic terrorism statute, they think of national law enforcement agencies like Homeland Security, FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I used to work. And they should, because that is obviously where, when you have major incidents like the insurrection at the Capitol, prior examples would be like the Oklahoma City bombing, things like that, where you would have federal agencies respond. But obviously, the goal is to try to get to prevent those as much as possible. We're not going to be able to prevent everything. And, just recently, Homeland Security, not too long ago, FBI put out, warnings about domestic extremism being one of the greatest threats that we do face in terms of national security in our country. So it needs to be a top priority for all of law enforcement. At the local level, we tend to see things on a much more, granular, community-based level, right? We see the Zoom bombings that occur, that I'm sure, many of your listeners have encountered, that can be racist, that can be anti-Semitic, homophobic, and we see swastikas painted, even at schools, or on places where people go in their communities. We've seen here in Westchester a sort of rash, if you will, of stickers put up by a particular group, the Patriot Front. And I say that publicly because it's been reported publicly. Things like that. And so the idea is, well, when you start seeing, if you just let those kind of go because they don't necessarily rise to the level of a crime in and of themselves, then you're missing an opportunity, I think, to, one, collect information and intelligence and two, to see the patterns across a broader area that could be pointing towards something more serious. So that's, especially in a place like Westchester, where we have 42 different police departments, I think that's where this kind of unifying collection of information and sharing and gathering within our county and then across the state and even to the federal level is really, really important. And then doing community outreach, doing public statements with local law enforcement. So that's something that we've really focused on, to do public statements with local law enforcement condemning this kind of conduct and letting people know that, you know, we're really watching. And we, meaning, again, local law enforcement. I think that's important for the community here, and it's important for people in law enforcement to hear.
You know, one of the things that had caught my eye a while back when you tweeted that your parents had escaped the Holocaust. And the reason for that is I have relatives that escaped, I have relatives that didn't and that perished. My father is Jewish, so I'm a Jew in Reform circles, not conservative and Orthodox, but I am of Jewish lineage, and I'm very fascinated by Holocaust studies, you know, World War II, etc. You wrote an incredible piece, which was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, an opinion piece for USA Today. And there's so much that you say in it, and I don't want to read the whole thing because I want you to speak and I want people to read it. But you talk about, and you've mentioned before, your parents narrowly escaping the Holocaust. And you talk about why you feel compelled to share their story. And you say, but because the Holocaust must stand as a reminder of the violence that can come from hate, disinformation, and dehumanizing people. And then you go on to say the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th was a stark warning that we need to fight this hatred and bigotry now before it escalates into a cancer we can't contain. You've heard these stories your whole life, as have I, not from my parents, from other relatives, more so my grandparents. But, you know, some people get angry when they hear an individual, whether it's you or me or somebody else, make any comparisons to what happened at the time during World War II and the Holocaust to today. Now, certainly, there was nobody calling for the murder of, you know, over 11 million people, 6 million of which were Jews on January 6th. But there are similarities. There is a correlation between hatred and that speech and what it can become if put into action, because that's exactly how the Holocaust started. Years and years of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic rhetoric, and quite frankly, obviously, a lot of falsehoods and propaganda that was, you know, fed to the people, and some of which were brainwashed with that hate.
No, absolutely. I mean, disinformation, propaganda, whatever you want to call it, but it really is fake propaganda, was a huge part of the cause, the how we ended up with the horrifying, you know, Holocaust. I don't think it's so much a matter about making comparisons as much as learning lessons from the past. And to do that, you have to look at what happened in other places and recognize, though, and this is a recognition that sadly I think more and more people have come to here, that we're not immune from that. You know, what we think of as isolated incidents, what we think of as, you know, political spin, what we think of as, targeting groups for various, you know, sort of maybe somewhat inconsequential reasons, right? Like, it's not with, as you say, the determination of, okay, we want to exterminate an entire race, but all of those things start to add up and build, and we have to be, I think, honest with ourselves as a country about, you know, where we are and what's possible here to prevent it.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be back with Mimi Rocha, District Attorney of Westchester County. Please follow her on Twitter. Her DA Twitter handle is at Westchester DA, and personal at Mimi Rocha 1, MIMIROCAH, the number 1. We'll be back. Also check out her USA Today opinion piece. I'm going to be posting that on all of my social media. Take a read. You can do that during the break or after this interview. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with her and with you right after this. Don't go.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. They can help save lives by not having play dates. That's right. By replacing get-togethers with virtual play dates and video chats, they can help slow the evil spread of germs. And if your superheroes do go outside, make sure they continue their superhero wing by staying 6 feet away from others to protect everyone in America land. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council. America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly spread of germs. Armed with only soap and water and hands, your superhero can protect you, your family, and everyone out there in America land. Amazing! Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
He was the heart of your family, and he taught you our history. He helped you fix your first flat. He was the best backyard DJ around. And every time he'd tell a story, he'd own the room. But now more than ever, he may feel alone. Today, older adults and their loved ones are struggling to connect, in a time when connection has never been more important. But there is something we can do. Embrace our older loved ones through StoryCorps Connect. With StoryCorps Connect, you can honor seniors remotely with an interview about their life. Every interview will be archived at the Library of Congress, becoming part of American history, so that years from now, future generations can listen in.
All right, Grandpa, what's one piece of advice you have for me?
Just 3 words, sweetheart. Live with courage.
The man that had the best stories still has plenty of stories to tell. So connect virtually and share the conversation of a lifetime at storycorpsconnect.org/AARP. Connect, honor, share. StoryCorps Connect.
Welcome to Code WAC, your podcast on America's broken healthcare system and how Medicare for All could help. I'm your host, Brenda Gazar. How do severely ill residents who live in states that haven't expanded Medicaid cope? We spoke to radio personality and performance artist Aliska Hahn, a former professional figure skater, about how her treatments for multiple sclerosis forced her into making some very difficult choices. Aliska, did you ever have a problem getting health insurance because you had MS?
I was so sick for so long, it depleted my financials so much that I didn't really try to get private insurance. But what happened is I moved to Wilmington, North Carolina a couple of years ago, and I moved there to be with my fiance. And I was not aware at the time that North Carolina is one of the 14 states that did not adopt Medicaid expansion. So I moved there, and after I moved there, I then realized, I'd had a recent flare. I was starting to get better, but I definitely needed coverage until I could get back on my feet. And I was not able to get it. I ended up going over $50,000 in debt. I collapsed in my home the day after Christmas, and it would have been the Christmas of 2019. And I had to be rushed to the hospital, had to be admitted. When the common treatment for MS, when it gets that far out of control, is almost like a chemo level steroid. It's very expensive. And so even though I was only in the hospital for 5 days and had a couple emergency room visits, I was deeply, deeply in debt.
Get the full Code WAC story on ProgressiveVoices.com and on the PV app. Catch all our episodes by subscribing to Code WAC wherever you find your podcasts. This podcast is powered by Heal California, a nonprofit that uplifts the voices of those fighting for healthcare reform around the country. Until next time, stay healthy.
Follow Leslie on Twitter. Just go to www.twitter.com/Leslie Marshall, and we'll be sure to share your tweets.
We are back. I'm Leslie Marshall. Our guest is Mimi Rocha, District Attorney of Westchester County, and she just took office January 1st, 2021. Once again, her Twitter handle for the DA's office is @WestchesterDA. Her personal Twitter handle is @MimiRocha1. We're talking about a great piece that she wrote for USA Today. Thank you, DA Rocha, for holding, and welcome back. You say in your piece, according to the FBI, hate crimes in 2019 were at their highest level in a decade, and that the data suggests a likely upward trend in 2020 last year as well. One, how did we get here? And two, what can we do to reverse course going forward, in your professional opinion?
Well, I think how we got here is a lot of what we've been talking about, that in part, what I'll call bias incidents often go unresponded to. And that's not because people don't care, but because there's the First Amendment, obviously, and there's a fine line between free speech and something that is, can cause hate, can cause harm, even if it doesn't rise to the level of a crime. And so if those are going unaddressed, it's a little bit of a sort of a theory of law enforcement that existed for a while, where you address the smaller problems first in a community, and then it helps prevent the larger crimes because people feel they take more pride in their community, they feel more comfortable, there's more people enjoying the outdoors, less crime. There's that sort of that is a theory of law enforcement prevention, and I think that's similar here. So we have to pay attention as law enforcement and as a society. I mean, this isn't all on law enforcement. This has to be a joint effort. It also has to be, here in Westchester, we have a wonderful Human Rights Commission that does a lot of work. There are wonderful private nonprofit organizations like the Anti-Defamation League. There are so many partners that I've spoken with actually over the past few weeks who do outreach and education at schools and to groups. But again, I think you can do that everywhere, which isn't really practical or realistic, or you can do it in areas where we see the need. And so part of that is collecting the information and recognizing the patterns that we're starting to see. Is it race-based hate that we're seeing here? Is it religious-based hate that we're seeing here? What kind of groups? How often? Is it escalating? Are these smaller incidents test incidents? And then obviously, where you do have things that rise to the level of actual criminal conduct, you need to pursue those cases, with aggressively. So I think it's sort of a combination of a lot of different things that got us here and that can help get things better. Some of it is, a lot of it is leadership and rhetoric. And I mean that at all levels of government, making it clear, again, from law enforcement, that we don't tolerate this, that we are looking at this, that we take it seriously.
You talk in your piece about getting creative to fight hate crimes. Two questions. One, I was cringing when I was watching on January 6th, numerous people that had just been broken into the Capitol, numerous people that were holding up signs or helped to assemble a noose gallows, if you will, right outside of our Capitol. Were you surprised as a DA how many people were walking freely out the door, making that job much more difficult for federal law enforcement, the FBI, to now track these people down? They're still tracking these people down. They're still posting pictures of these individuals every day. I was just wondering, from your perspective, because I'm not an attorney, I'm not a DA, how that looked to you.
Yeah, look, it was shocking. And I talked to friends in various positions of, law enforcement, former law enforcement, around the country, who really, we couldn't believe what we were seeing. And you don't really need to be in law enforcement, as you say, to have that reaction, because it was shocking. And then people just walked away. What I said, I think 2 days or the day after that attack, is we really need, first and foremost, we need to, arrest and prosecute where appropriate people who are responsible for all levels of crimes and violence at the Capitol. But I think the second most important thing is a real accounting, a real examination in this country, whether it be by an independent commission or various law enforcement agencies that have internal watchdogs that can do this kind of investigation, to see what happened. We had a failed law enforcement response. Now, I say that cautiously because there were many heroes that day. Yes. Obviously, there were many law enforcement who did what they could that day. But overall, from a systemic point of view, if you look at it, it was a failed response. I mean, there's no way you can look at what happened. They never should have been able to breach the Capitol. They certainly never should have been able to get inside the chamber. We never should have had to come this close to more people losing their lives. Not to mention the emotional trauma and potential political consequences that day. So I think that we really need to figure out what happened. Was it a matter of not being prepared? And if so, why weren't we prepared? Were there people who gave some of the insurrectionists a pass because of certain beliefs or racism? I mean, there are all sorts of different possible explanations. I try not to jump to conclusions, but it was really hard to look at that day and not say, one, that there was a systemic failure, although again, there were many heroes, and two, that it sure looked like people were being treated differently because they were white, that they were allowed to walk in some cases, literally have a door open and then walk away. And why they weren't arrested after that. I think there was survival mode and people just, I don't know. I don't want to speak for what was going on, but it is, the FBI, I think, is doing a remarkable job of moving this investigation very fast, very efficiently. But as you say, we're starting from a very different point than if people had actually been arrested that day.
Absolutely. Or if they get arrested and are allowed to go to Mexico. And not just on vacation, but leave the country where you could disappear quite easily. You talk in your piece, when I had mentioned before, get creative to fight hate crimes. One of the things that you say, and I was aware of this, but I'm not sure everybody listening and viewing today is, and the why, that hate crimes often go unreported, or underreported. Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, if you think about it, a large part of the people against whom bias incidents and hate crimes happen are people who aren't necessarily going to feel comfortable coming forward to law enforcement. It can be people who are immigrants, people who don't have legal status, people who don't trust law enforcement to begin with, people who think they're not going to get a real response or be taken seriously. It can be fear that if you call attention to yourself, you're just going to get targeted with more hate. So there's a lot of different reasons why they feel, unlike with other areas of crime, I think people tend sometimes, not rightfully, but they do feel a sense of shame or embarrassment, and they would rather just kind of bury it and walk away from it. I obviously would encourage people to not do that, but to come forward. And that's part of what we've been doing, talking about this so much openly in the county, not just me, but the police chiefs, law enforcement that we work with, to say, no, we want to hear from you. We're talking about setting up a hotline here in our office that will make it even more easy for people to report. The Human Rights Commission that I mentioned before, they have an online form where people can submit incidents, so we're trying to make it easier for people to come forward. Obviously, they can report directly to the police and, wherever you live. And I think it's if nothing else, it's important to document these because it may not just be about that one incident, and you won't know that unless it's reported somewhere and we can kind of get a bigger picture from, across our county and different communities.
You had also mentioned your piece that local, and we have less than a minute, but you talked about local prosecutors like you have a unique responsibility to prosecute hate crimes. Very quickly, in less than a minute, do more crimes need to be defined as hate crimes, and are we not prosecuting enough of those hate crimes?
Well, I mean, I think everyone, all law enforcement and lawmakers should take a good look at their legislation and their statutes and make sure that they are adequate. I mean, this is a time for reexamination, so it's hard to speak, about that across the country. There's a lot of debate about whether we should have a domestic terrorism law, which is, escalating from what we're talking about. But I think that's something that we do need to have. But I understand that there is definitely good arguments on both sides about that issue. But I think it's a time for re-examining and looking at those statutes. And I would hope that everyone's doing that in their communities.
Well, I love that one of your goals as DA for Westchester County is to work every day to ensure all communities are safe. Knowing your background, even though I don't live in Westchester, I live in LA, I know that will be the case, and it's really nice to know that the people of Westchester County have you in their best interest at your heart. You're very passionate about. Thank you for taking the time. That's the DA, Mimi Roca from Westchester County. Like I said, on Twitter, you can follow her DA account at Westchester DA, and personally, hers is at Mimi Roca, MIMIROCAH. I follow her. You really should. She's got a lot of interesting stuff in there. Thank you once again, DA Roca. I'm Leslie Marshall. Shout out to Marky Mark Maldi, your executive producer. Same bat time, same bat channel here. Going